Danny Brassel has delivered presentations to over 3,500 audiences across 25 years, covering education, leadership, and communication skills. People call him Jim Carrey with a PhD for his high energy, entertaining speaking style. He co-founded the world's largest online reading engagement program and now coaches leaders from organizations like Entrepreneurs Organization, plus representatives from Dean Graziosi and Tony Robbins on crafting presentations that convert audiences into clients. And welcome to the next episode of Freelancer Training on how to find direct clients, a podcast hosted by myself, Jason Willis-Lee. This is the show that makes digital marketing a little easier and much more fun by using the perfect combo and just the right dose of business strategy and tech. I'm your host, Jason Willis-Lee. I'm a digital marketing enthusiast, and today I'm very thrilled to welcome my special guest. His name is Danny Brassel. Danny brings a very unique slant and angle to our discussion. Danny, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Fantastic. Thanks so much for having me, Jason. More importantly, thanks for spreading some joy in the world. We need a lot more of you, my friend.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for your time and your insights that you're going to give us. Can you just start with an icebreaker? What is your business journey? How did you get to where you are now? I know you're an acclaimed speaker. You've done thousands, four-figure events and converting those events into sales and revenue. How did you get to where you are today from where you started?
Yeah, if I was going to write an autobiography, Jason, I would probably call it Pivots because I feel like I've already lived 9 lives. 30 years ago, I was a reporter, a journalist covering President Bush Sr. in the 1992 presidential election. I loved my job. I got to meet every editor of every major daily. And one editor offered me the City Beat for $16,500 a year. Meanwhile, a friend told me they were hiring teachers in South Central Los Angeles for $25,000 a year. So I became an educator for the noblest of reasons, Jason, for the high pay. And I actually fell in love with teaching. I've taught all age levels from preschoolers all the way up to rocket scientists. I can make that claim because I used to teach English as a second language to engineering students at the University of Southern California. And in 2005, my wife and I attended a real estate seminar, which turned out to be a scam, and we lost everything financially. And I could give you the woe is me story, but I'm a positive person. I learned a lot from the experience. First of all, I learned that my wife is my soulmate. I put her through the ringer, and she stood right by me. She's an incredible human being. Second of all, I learned that money's not everything because you can lose money just like that. Third, I try not to judge other people because if I was somebody who saw what I had done, I would have said, well, you deserve that. But now I realize unless you know everything about a person, you really don't know anything about a person. Fourth, I became a Christian, which I'm always embarrassed to confess it took a catastrophe. But the more I read the Bible, I realize I'm not the first screw up to find Jesus. And fifth, and probably most applicable to this podcast, I didn't want to file for bankruptcy. And my accountant said, well, you have to earn this much more money this year. And so I started speaking on the side, and I hit that number right on the number. Well, the next year, Jason, he gave me a much higher number. And I hit that number right on the number. So in year 3, I thought, well, maybe I should set a higher number. And basically, during one of the worst economic downturns in world history, I was able to build up a highly lucrative speaking business, which eventually attracted the attention of some pretty famous people and companies who were asking me to coach them. And I have to confess, I really resisted coaching for a long time, Jason, just because you need to know this about me. I'm obsessive compulsive. I will not let you fail. I will be on your back, holding you accountable until you succeed. Well, now that I work primarily with entrepreneurs and executives and business owners, I find that they're highly motivated. They do the work, and it's probably been the most gratifying thing I've ever done. So we can go down whichever path you choose, my friend.
There are so many anecdotes there. I love the George Bush story. I followed the 92 campaign. I remember him saying, watch my lips, they never leave the face, no tax rises. And then I think he did actually raise taxes. And then I on the 19th of December 2019, I found myself sitting next to one former President Al Gore at Barajas, Madrid airport, and we were just boarding a plane to London. He was then heading off to Tennessee, I think. And I just remember that moment. He was in his 70s, no entourage or anything. He'd just come for the climate change summit. And I got to meet, the number two politician in your country when I was 17. This was just 6 years ago. So yeah, that's an incredible journey. I mean, let's talk about speaking for online service providers, because that's kind of the audience we're talking to. How you've converted a lot of discovery calls into signed contracts, maybe 3,500, I think it was, speaking engagements. Most of us as service providers would be more inclined to list our list of credentials on a discovery call, meeting a client for the first time. What is the exact conversion system you get from a conversation like this with a potential client to a signed contract? I mean, how is there a follow-up sequence? How do you handle their objections when they say, I need to think about it? What kind of strategies do you use with your speaking clients to get gigs?
Well, I think the most important thing always to consider, Jason, it's the same as when I tell people when I'm working with clients on stage and they say, well, I don't want to sound salesy. And so the strategy I suggest is, well, don't sell, just serve. The person's giving you the most precious asset, their time. And so even if I'm on a call with a potential client, I'm really just trying to figure out, well, I want to understand what their problem is and if there's anything I can do to solve it for them. And it just totally changes your mindset, and it makes it so it's not this pushy sales process that I see. That's really an outdated model. I honestly believe that if you really lead with service, you'll be much more successful. And so that would be the strategy I would suggest to everybody in your audience. In terms of sales calls, I structure them very similar to the way I structure presentations. You have to forgive me, former teacher, so everything I do either rhymes or it's alliterative. And so I came up with what I call the 5 C's process. Those 5 C's are clarity, connect, content, call to action, and finally to close. Before you do any kind of presentation, the most important questions are what I call the 2 clarity questions. Those 2 questions are, who is your audience and what is the problem that you solve? Now, those sound like very basic questions. They very much are, but you'd be amazed. 95% of the people I work with cannot answer one or both of those questions in a succinct fashion. You have to be very clear. That's why I was very attracted to your podcast, Jason, because you're very clear on your audience, and I commend you for that. A lot of people try to be all things to all people, and I'm not saying that you can't eventually be that, but I'm a big believer in niching down and then maybe expanding your niche from beyond that.
Yeah, totally. 1 inch wide, 1 mile deep, right? It's going
Mhm.
niche. That's a big part of the book I published last year. The first chapter is all about how to niche your way to the top. And that's the first thing I teach anyone who wants to work with me is niching down, and not being too broad. You've got to be very, very clear about your audience. What about story frameworks, Danny? I mean, a lot of translators to get by. There's a lot of commoditization in my industry, or there has been, and even more so now with AI, it's become commoditized. A lot of us are editing post-machine output. Post-machine translation has been around for a while. Now with AI, it's all over the place. It's difficult to work on things from scratch as a human in this AI human hybrid model. Give us a story framework that my people, LSPs, language service providers, that's translators, interpreters, copywriters, can use to demonstrate their specialized value, their niche value, instead of competing on rates. Because that's just a race to the bottom. It's who can be the cheapest, and that's just a race to the bottom of the world. That's no good. You've got to stand your ground. Can you give us a story framework based on your journalistic and writing experience? And then we'll talk
Yeah.
about that book behind you, because that's just too good not to ask a question. What is Misfits and Crackpots about? But let's do it. Let's do the story framework question, please.
Well, first of all, I completely agree with you on the race to the bottom. By the way, if you try to get Walmart customers, if you try to have Walmart prices, you're going to get Walmart customers, and they're the biggest pains. I always give the example. I have 2 friends that are waiters at restaurants. One is a waiter at Morton's, which is an exclusive steak restaurant. He loves his clients, the people that come to the restaurant. He averages about $200 per table in tips. The other one is a waiter at an Applebee's, which is a more family-oriented restaurant. And his average tip is about $10, and his customers are like, "Well, I'd like a steak, but can you make half of it medium rare and half of it well done?" They're just a pain in the butt, so you definitely don't want to do that. In terms of story structure, there's all kinds of different story structures and frameworks. For misfits and crackpots. When I was an elementary school teacher, excuse me, a middle school teacher for teenagers, I was the only teacher at my school that none of my students were ever tardy. And it's because I always started class by reading aloud a Paul Harvey story. When I was a kid, Paul Harvey would come on the radio every day at 12:15 and say, "I'm Paul Harvey with the rest of the story." And for 5 minutes, he's telling you a story and you're trying to guess who's he talking about or what's the company. And my students loved it, but the problem with Paul Harvey is a lot of his stories are about Fred Astaire and Sears Roebuck. Well, today kids don't even know who what those things are. And so I wrote this book, Leadership Begins with Motivation, as an homage to Paul Harvey, with more updated stories about people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. But after I wrote the book, Jason, I read it and I'm like, that's interesting. Completely unintentionally, a lot of the examples in this book were of white male Americans. And so I wrote Misfits and Crackpots, and most of the examples in this book are of women, minorities, and international people, because I think people need to hear inspiring stories from all over the place. I'll give you an exercise I do with my clients. It's one of the first things I do is, and you can do this also later, Jason, is get in a nice, comfortable chair with a pen and paper, libation of choice, Vino Rosa in Madrid. And I want you to write down every story that's ever happened in your life. And I don't mean the entire story. I just mean triggers, like the time I locked myself out of the car in front of the grocery store, the time Dad spilt mustard on his tie when we went to that fancy restaurant. You'll find in just an hour, you can come up with literally hundreds of stories like that. So that's the first part of the exercise. The second part of the exercise is then I want you to think about, what's this story really about? Oh, this is a story about never giving up. Oh, this is a story about successful time management. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is a story about love. On my computer, I literally have hundreds of files with tens of thousands of stories. So when I'm putting together a presentation and I want my audience to take a certain action or feel a certain emotion, I know exactly the story that I can use to get them there. And so for your audience, I always tell people there's a difference between good presentations and excellent presentations. Good presentations tell stories, but excellent presentations tell stories with intention, because there's only one way I measure your effectiveness as a speaker. I've had clients come up to me, they say, "I got a standing ovation." I'm like, good for you. I've had other clients say, "Man, people think I'm a really good speaker now." I'm like, that's wonderful. But the only way I measure your effectiveness is how many people in your audience are deciding to take the next step with you. Now, it can be an unpaid next step, like subscribe to my podcast or vote for me. More typically, and this would relate more to your audience, it's usually more of a paid offer, like buy my product or invest in my services. I want to know our numbers, is how many people are in your audience and how many people are deciding, you know what, I kind of think Jason's a person I can trust. I'd like to hire Jason because he's somebody I want to work with. That's the only way I'm measuring how effective we are as presenters.
Yeah, that's absolutely top-notch in terms of storytelling for great presentations. I've heard a few motivational speakers in my time at various events here and there. One not far from you in Orlando at Podfest a year ago. And the speaker was excellent because the stories were told with emotion and intent, as you just said. And those are the best. And we can do that to sell services as well, right? If it's a language service, we can tell stories, we can get on calls, we can build a P2P relationship as you and I are doing now. I hadn't met you before today. I'm just going to go into one aspect of your biography, and then we'll talk about signals on calls. You described yourself, or someone had described you as Jim Carrey with a PhD. But when I saw you, I immediately thought you are a spitting image of Dennis Quaid, another actor. Where did you get the Jim Carrey with a PhD epithet? And have you used that sort of connection to a celebrity to your advantage at work, I guess, does that help your personal branding?
Well, it definitely helps me, Jason. I think where I'm a little bit different than a lot of these so-called speaking coaches is a lot of people will train people to talk about the darkest moments in their lives to connect with their audiences. And there's
Yes.
three reasons why I refuse to do that, Jason. First of all, the world just survived a global pandemic. Everybody's had a lot of bad stuff happen to them. I don't think we need more stories of doom and gloom. I think we need more uplifting stories of hope. Second of all, I teach my clients how to create what I call a well crafted story. Politicians would call it a stump speech. You can call it peanut butter and jelly. It doesn't matter what you call it. This is a presentation that you're going to deliver again and again to introduce yourself to new audiences. It's going to be so ingrained in your memory. It's going to be like the Lord's Prayer or the national anthem. You're not going to have to think about it. Well, I always challenge people, do you really want to talk about the worst moment of your life again and again? I mean, I have a friend, his daughter was killed in a school shooting. He's delivered that speech to over 1,000 audiences. I have no idea how he does that. You have to be much stronger than me. I want you having fun while you're on stage. I mean, most of the people I work with, they either don't want to speak or they're completely terrified of speaking. So I have to show them ways to make them comfortable. And third, and this is where people get angry with me. I have one basic objective when I'm on stage. I want you to leave feeling better than when you came in. I want you laughing, smiling, happy. I think there's something admirable about that as a basic objective. I believe the people that tell the same sad story again and again, by the 20th time they're telling it, now those are crocodile tears and now they're being manipulative. And I'm not saying it's not an effective sales strategy. It's actually a very effective sales strategy. But I personally don't want to have to take a shower after I get off stage because I just manipulated my audience. There are ethical ways to get people to want to do business with you. And again, life's too short. I think you should be having fun. And so I guess I get the moniker because I take my job seriously. I don't take myself too seriously because I ain't all that, and neither are you. And if you think you're all that, just teach kindergarten for a week. The little ones, they'll set you straight pretty quickly. I had a little girl once. I said, LaShonda, question. She's like, Mr. Brassel, when are you going to trim your nose hair? I'm like, this afternoon. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. I ain't all that.
Let's talk about buying signals and audiences. I mean, you obviously read live audiences for buying signals for a living. You're doing all these keynotes, and it's very impressive the number of speaking engagements you've had. So let's just paint a situation. There's an interpreter, maybe a public hospital interpreter, on a discovery call with a skeptical procurement manager. What are the top three verbal cues if it's auditory, or maybe visual cues if it's a video call like this one, that tell you they're ready to buy versus they're about to ghost you? What kind of things would you be leaning into without manipulating? And you mentioned ethical selling. I'm all for that. What kind of things would you be leaning into, Danny, on that call to get those buying signals that someone's
Well,
about to do business with?
you're already hitting on a couple of them, Jason. I mean, when they're leaning in, that's telling me something. When they're nodding their head, that's also a very good. I'm a big believer in the nonverbal cues. It's actually one of the strategies I share with most speakers. Most speakers film themselves when they're on stage. I'm like, start filming your audience. Your audience will tell you everything you need to know. If you see the people nodding or they're leaning in, that means you're doing a good job. If they're on their phones, that means you have to change something in your presentation. Watch the body language. I always say that there's two types of people in the audience. I'm going to be very stereotypical. I'm going to say it's the married couple. So the husband is usually the person I call Joe Friday. Joe Friday always sits there with his arms crossed, looking very skeptical, like, what are you trying to sell me? How much is this going to cost? What do I got to do? How long is it going to take? And a clear presentation has a very clear call to action that's going to address all the needs of that gentleman. But the problem I see in a lot of presentations is most people end with their call to action. And if you end with the call to action, you're ignoring potentially 50% of your audience, which is the wife. The wife is Julia Roberts. She doesn't care how much it costs. She just wants to feel good. The reason I listen to Jason's podcast is he makes me feel good. I learn things every single time, and he inspires me. And so those nonverbal cues, you and I know this. This is our business. I mean, especially working with international people, that was one of the best things I learned from working with a lot of international students is, well, plus my mother-in-law only speaks Mandarin, and so it's almost like a Charlie Chaplin thing, but it was great because I can pick up things just based on how her body language is. I think the body language, those cues I've heard that, nonverbal communication is 70% of communication. I always question statistics like that. I'm like, how can you prove that? But I get the gist of what they're saying is it's the nonverbal cues. What's a person telling you with their body language? Pay attention to those things. Those are gold. They're actually usually much more informative than verbal cues.
Yeah, as you were talking there, I was just sort of drafting out a pitch to Julia Roberts in my mind. How would I get a celebrity podcast pitch out to Julia Roberts, and what would I do? How would I position that for her to make say, yes, that's an amazing idea. You mentioned to me before we came on that you were teaching English as a foreign language to engineering students in Southern California. Could you talk a little about that experience and how that sort of molded you into the motivational speaker you are today, and what kind of lessons can we draw from that? Were these all foreign students? Obviously, English wasn't their native language. How did that sort of, I know you've been in Spain. We talked about you living near the Santiago Bernabeu Stadium. Just talk a little about that experience. I'm just interested in the transformative arc of how that, perhaps in a storytelling sense, led you to where you are now.
Yeah, it was very informative for me. Well, when I was teaching in South Central Los Angeles, when I first started teaching elementary, I started off the wrong way. I went backwards. I went with the older kids all the way down to the younger ones, and I learned the younger ones are the ones that teach you everything you need to know because they have about a 7-minute attention span. I say it's New York, New York. If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. When I first started teaching elementary school, the first elementary school I went to, the principal said, Mr. Brassel, do you speak any Spanish? I'm like, un poquito. He says, good, you're our new bilingual coordinator. This was a school of 950 students. 85% of them spoke Spanish as a first language. On my first day of school, they gave me 75 kids and said, we don't know what grade these kids are in or what country they're from. Can you figure it out? And I'm like, Isabel, suck and thumb, go to kindergarten. Paco, mustache, go to 5th grade. And I looked at the kids. I'm like, guess what? You all know Spanish. I know English. We're all getting 2 languages this year. And I was very blessed to have lots of second language learners in my classroom. When I went to the University of Southern California, the USC happens to have the second largest international student population of any university on the planet. And one of my jobs was to actually test every single engineering school student to see if they needed any type of English. And so, you get like a student from India, which India, one of their languages is English. And so I'd ask, well, what's your major? I've come here to study rocket science because I want to be a nuclear engineer. I'm like, okay, they're fine. Often, and this is an important point, a lot of people feel self-conscious about their accents. But I believe accents, and I think you probably agree with me on this, Jason, I think they add flavor to anything. California, we had the governor, he had a pretty thick accent. He did pretty well for himself, Arnold Schwarzenegger. So I don't think accents are a bad thing. But then I'd get like a student from Taiwan, and I'd ask him, well, what's your major? Yes. Great. What kind of car do you drive? Yes. Okay. We're going to put you in an English class, which is fine. And it was great because I have an approach this is important for your audience to understand. Walt Disney said people think in pictures, and I completely agree with him on that. And I can prove this to you. Jason, right now, I want you to think of an apple. Take about 5 seconds and think of an apple. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now tell me what you just thought of.
I was thinking of 2 apples, a green, golden, delicious, and the red one, which I like, which is the more expensive one in the supermarket. I'm not sure what that's called, but it's a red one. And these are different apples.
Yeah, that's perfect. So, and I have people, sometimes they'll think of apple pie, or sometimes people get really creative. They think of an Apple iPhone or an Apple computer, lots of different types of apples. But yet I've done this with tens of thousands, maybe over 100,000 people at this point. I've never once had a person tell me, oh, you know what I thought of? APPLE. Because we don't think in words. We think in pictures. It's the same point I make to people about storytelling. I'll use the Bible as an example. I think Jesus is probably the most frustrated teacher ever to live on the planet. Every time he's talking to the disciples trying to make a point they don't get it, he's like, okay, Let me tell you a story. So he illustrates it with a story. I bet you, Jason, that 9 out of 10 non-Christians are familiar with the story of the prodigal son. They're familiar with the story of the Good Samaritan. They're familiar with the story of David and Goliath. But I also bet you that 9 out of 10 Christians cannot tell you the Ten Commandments. And the reason is the Ten Commandments was not presented as a story. It's presented as a PowerPoint slide with 10 bullet points. And people don't remember things like that. And so this is the power of storytelling. You know, Al Gore, who you met at Barajas Airport, Al Gore, his presentation on An Inconvenient Truth on the environment,
Yes.
it's really one of the best presentations. When I watched that, I have never seen a person use a PowerPoint, which it was Keynote, the Apple version of PowerPoint, which was just extraordinary. When I watched it, I'm like, this is the most incredible presentation I've watched using a PowerPoint, because most people, they have these wordy slides. He didn't do that at all. He used pictures, because pictures stay in people's minds. That's why when you're watching the news at night, and I mean, I don't watch the news anymore, but when the anchor is talking about a war, there's a picture of like an explosion in the upper right-hand corner. It's not a whole bunch of bullet points about what the prime minister is going to do or whatever like that. It's always a picture. And so our job as translators, our job as storytellers is how do we get people to remember what we're talking about? You do that with more compelling stories.
Yeah, Seth Godin does exactly the same. He has a keynote just based on pictures. Um, I'm just trying to think of how I sparked a conversation with Gore. It was basically, I was so awestruck of being sat next to him, wondering what I was going to say, that I just looked at his sneakers, or trainers as we call them over here, and I said, those sneakers, he had some blue, looked like suede sneakers on. I said, those sneakers are really, I was like, I know who you are, but where'd you buy the sneakers? And then I had him send me the outlet, one of his people send me the outlet of where the sneakers were born, and he actually sent me. So that was it was literally a 5-minute discussion before we boarded the plane. As we boarded, I turned right, he turned left, and that was the end of it. Going back to the accents, the stereotypical accents, my father, Robin, used to live in Muscat, Oman for the last 7 years of his career. So taking from 53, a little older than I am now, to 60 when he retired early. And he used to have an Arabic secretary called Sheikha. And Sheikha would be very fond of saying, yes, sir. And he would just always say, yes, sir. That was the default answer. And eventually my father asked him, Sheikha, when you say, yes, sir, have you done this photocopying? Yes, sir. When you say yes, sir, Shaker, what you actually mean is no, sir, isn't it? And he goes, yes, sir. So that's a wonderful sort of anecdote of somewhere where they deliberately subordinate themselves in front of someone they perceive to be of superior value. Or he also had a Sri Lankan secretary. My mother is Sri Lankan, so perhaps that has something to do with it. And she would refer to him as the doctor, because he had a PhD. He wasn't a man of medicine, but she would refer to him as the doctor, which we all thought was very funny. Danny, just a couple of final five questions, and then we can carry on talking off air as well. What is the worst investment you've ever made? I remember you said something about a real estate investment. That one of the books I'm reading now is called The Road to Less Stupid. It's by a business strategist called Keith Cunningham, and he advocates that the way to success is minimizing unforced errors. I'm a massive tennis fan, so minimizing unforced errors. It sounds like you made an unforced error. Could you give an example of that bad investor? Just lay out what that was and how you would avoid it if you could talk to your younger self and go back.
So that's a great question, Jason, and I probably would not avoid it because I've learned so much from my mistakes. The only thing that pushed me to speaking and eventually coaching was by making that horrible mistake of the real estate investments I made. So I don't know. I'm not a person that lives with regrets. I try to, sometimes you win, sometimes you learn is the way I look at it. I always tell people there's two ways to get better at speaking. First of all, you got to watch lots of speakers. And so I watch about 10 speakers a day. If you're a tennis fan, I encourage you to watch the great tennis player Roger Federer, his address to the graduates of Dartmouth, I think it was.
I
He
have
makes a
seen that
point.
address. Yeah, wonderful
It,
speech. Yeah.
isn't it my favorite part of the speech, though, is he says he won over 80% of his matches throughout his career, but they went back to look at the points. He only won 54% of the points in his career, which is fascinating to me. I mean, just that little difference between being one of the greatest tennis players of all time, him and Novak and Rafa are going to be considered, at least right now. I mean, when I was growing up, it was Pete Sampras, and before it was Pete Sampras, it was Bjorn Borg. I mean, they just keep on setting the bar higher,
Correct.
you
Yeah.
know. But I just found that was amazing, and so the road less stoop. So I'll have to check out the book by Keith Cunningham. It sounds very similar to Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's business partner. He said that basically the path to success is just minimizing stupid mistakes. It was basically, most people, they make a dumb investment because they don't go conservative. I once had a finance professor, and he said, I can get all of you rich slowly if you just do these basic things. And that always stuck with me. But I don't live life with regrets. I think the regret is if you actually don't learn the lesson.
I think the Charlie Munger quote is most people, everything is hard. If people find things easy, they're stupid. I think that's
Yeah,
one of his quotes. Yeah, Charlie
great.
Munger.
Mm-hmm.
And the Federer point, I think that the lesson from the Federer point is that these guys, the GOATs, so Federer, Novak, and Rafa, were just playing the pressure points better than everyone else. So maybe there is 50-50 and there's just a point of inflection, like a chess match. It might be just moving a pawn, a minuscule move that flips the match the other way. Um, what moved me in your story about the bad investment was that it strengthened your relationship with your wife. Your wife stood by you. She's with you today. And then I was thinking of my wife and our trip to Los Angeles, and we actually had, you mentioned the gubernator, we actually visited the governor's office in Sacramento, and back in LA where we started, we ended up in a restaurant called Shiatzi's, which was owned by Arnold Schwarzenegger. So he wasn't there, we didn't get to see him, but nor was he there in the office, or they don't allow you beyond the ante room. So that was quite an exciting trip that I think helped cemented us right at the beginning of our relationship, which was over 20 years ago. So I love the way that you had an adverse experience, and you've taken the positives from that, which is incredible. I mean, just a couple of more final five questions because I'm conscious of your time. Danny, using just one word, how would you describe AI's impact on your niche, which is communication-based businesses? I mean, you're a former journalist, so like journalism, like speaking, like translation and storytelling. What impact has AI had for you, would you say? Because AI it's here, it's getting bigger. I think we have another couple of years of innovation, and then all hell breaks loose, and the world of work just changes completely. It's had a massive impact on my industry, as you can imagine. It's commoditized things. So, what is the impact for you? Give me your take on that, because you're a communications professional.
Yeah, eye-opening would be the single word. I most people tell you the doom and gloom behind AI, and if you want to focus on that, and you can focus on that. I look at all the positive things. People forget that ChatGPT, I think, is just over 3 years old. When ChatGPT came out, I think it was around November of 2022 or 2023.
Yeah.
The very first thing, you and I both have a belief. I believe in coaches, and so I hired an AI coach to teach me all about AI.
Mm.
And it just cracks me up, Jason, because everything he taught me is completely irrelevant at this point. Every single day, it's getting better and better. And just like you, I realize, oh, I better pay attention, because the fact is, what I do right now, AI can do for another person. You know, I'm going to be irrelevant the way. So I have to figure out a better way to make my services essentials different than AI. I cannot compete with AI. It's unbelievable to me. I thought I was a couple of years ago. I used to say, oh, AI doesn't get sense of humor, so I'll always be all right with that. Well, it's starting to actually understand humor, and it's unbelievable to me. I'm like, wow, I'm fascinated by that. But the guy that taught me AI, this is just to encourage the audience. He was a medical doctor. His father had died of pancreatic cancer, and so he's developed an AI that can detect pancreatic cancer in stage one. And he also told me something that will always stick with me. He's like, Danny, just so you know, the first person to live to be 150 years old is alive today.
Hmm.
because
That's true.
because
Yeah.
AI with AI we'll be able to figure out diets and exercise and that's fascinating to me. And so there's all kinds of yes, there's the negatives, but there's he'd also point out he's like, well, with AI you can figure out if there's a starving village in Africa where they are, what how much they need, what kind of supplies. We'll be able to figure out where the weak bridges are in Spain. You know, does Galicia need this road repair? I mean, it's fascinating to me. So you know, that's why I don't watch the news. It's kind of silly since I used to be a reporter, but you know, the fact is, the news is always going to portray all the negatives, and I want to look. I want to focus on the positives. That's why I love what I do today. Is I see people growing businesses. It's something that gets me very excited.
I was on a podcast just a couple of days ago, and I was asked a similar question to what I asked you. What is the impact of AI on medicine? And I was talking about radiology, and but what I was dwelling on in your answer was that your differentiator in your speaking engagements is talking to you, the relationship with you, which is P2P. And I'm working on an authority framework called the Bridge, and the R of the Bridge is P2P relationships, R for relationships. So I teach people to, we're in this AI human world. You have to lean into the human side when you're business, developing business relationships and just leverage the AI. AI is a tool. It's not your relationship. It's not a strategy. It's just a tool. So we all need to, and I've been learning about AI just as you have. I've been doing Claude Pro and working out how to use projects and artifacts and all these things to get the most juice out of my squeeze, most business juice out of my squeeze. One of my mentors used to say that. Um, so let's wrap up, Danny. I don't want to key. I could talk to you for hours. I think I have the impression that the stories and anecdotes could go on for a long time. We discussed a lot of things. We discussed storytelling frameworks, P2P relationships, all kinds of things. From your standpoint, which is communications applicable to us as service providers, language service providers. What is your final sort of notable nugget you'd like people to take away from this conversation? What is the number one takeaway?
Well, an important thing, the biggest mistake, there's two, I'll share the two biggest mistakes I see most people make in their presentations. Number
Please.
one, stop bragging. Stop talking about your successes. Start talking about your failures because not everybody in your audience has succeeded, but they've all failed. And the more you share your own failures, the more your audience is going to see themselves in you. And that's ultimately what you're trying to do. That's the point of a presentation, is to connect with your audience. The second biggest mistake I see most people make is they have multiple calls to action. You'll definitely see it in your field. When I go to a medical conference, they'll say, well, here's my Facebook page, here's my Twitter, here's my email, here's my phone number.
Yeah.
I was on a podcast yesterday, and the hostess at the end of the podcast, she said, I hope you enjoyed our podcast today. Make sure you like, subscribe, and give us a 5-star review. We got off air, and I said, you just asked your audience to do 3 things. They're not going to do any of them because, and again, I'm a former teacher, choices confuse and cause you to lose. Don't make your audience think. Show them exactly what you want them to do. Be very clear about that. And you're going to, just by doing that one simple thing, you'll increase your conversion rate. Even your audience on a sales call, don't say, don't give them options. When do you want to book our next appointment? And just
I think
stop
I'm
talking.
guilty. I think I'm absolutely guilty. I'm feeling guilty of both mistakes. I probably made presentations more about me than about the audience, which is a big mistake. And just the other day, I was telling a business accountability partner he has too many calls to action on his website. There was do the quiz, book a discovery. I said, look, just stick to the quiz, put it as a banner on your website, above the fold at the top, and start collecting emails. They're nurtured to the list. So just uncanny talking to you because these things I can certainly relate to exactly what you just said. Danny, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Where can my listeners connect with you or learn more about your work and expertise? What is the one call to action you want people to take away after listening to us talk?
Well, as a thank you to you, Jason, and your audience for having to listen to me, I wanted to give everybody a freebie. So if you go to freestoryguide.com, guide like a tour guide, freestoryguide.com, I'm going to give everybody their own complimentary, well-crafted story blueprint. What this is the actual process that my partner and I take you through to help you create your well-crafted story. What this does for you is it takes the guesswork out of where should I put this story and why am I putting it here? And what this means for you is you have a system to convert your audiences into actual clients. You can get that at freestoryguide.com. And Jason, I just want to thank you again for having me on. I think we're two peas in a pod. I have a feeling we're going to go off air and talk for another 3 hours.
That's exactly how I feel. Freestoryguide.com. We'll make sure that's in the show notes, and you get some people. There'll be a lot of people, I think, downloading that guide. Okay, let's wrap it up for today's episode of Freelancer Training on how to find direct clients. Stay tuned for more engaging discussions like the one I had today with Danny on the ever-evolving landscape of language and digital marketing. Until then, remember what I always say: stay on your game and future-proof your career in the AI digital era. Bye from me, and many thanks again to Danny Brassel, my special guest. See you next time.
Here's a fun fact about Jason. Jason is a big Star Wars fan. Thanks for tuning in to the How to Find More Direct Clients Than You Can Poke a Stick At podcast. We'll be back soon. In the meantime, why not head over to www.entrepreneurialtranslator.com to access all our tools and resources to monetize and future-proof your freelance translation business. And don't forget to hit the plus button in Apple Podcasts or iTunes, or subscribe in Spotify to be notified when new episodes drop. For regular tips and insights, business strategy, or marketing techniques straight to your inbox, please sign up at www.entrepreneurialtranslator.com.